Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Texas based immigration attorney Kate Lincoln-Goldfinch. Kate, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me on, Brittany.
I want to talk about a story that you and I broke down a couple months ago, and that is about Kilmar Abrego Garcia. This is a case that some have said shows the Trump administration's really aggressive approach when it comes to immigration. Critics have called this an assault on due process. But to start off the conversation, I want to give a rough timeline of what's happened so far. Earlier this year, Abrego Garcia was mistakenly deported to El Salvador. He returned to the United States in June, and then he was detained on human smuggling charges, and now he's currently awaiting a January trial on those charges. On Friday, he was released from custody in Tennessee, and he returned to Maryland. But this past Monday, he was once again detained after reporting to ICE in Maryland. And DHS is now saying they could deport him to Uganda, but a federal judge temporarily blocked his deportation. There have been certainly a lot of developments in the past couple of days, especially. So, provide your perspective here as an immigration attorney. What do you make of what's happened in recent days?
Yeah, that was an excellent and very quick summary of what has been a long and windy and very emotional road for Kilmar and his family. I think that the Trump administration made a mistake, and the right thing to do at the beginning would have been to acknowledge the mistake, bring Kilmar home, and that would have been the end of the story. But instead, they're unwilling to admit error. And so they doubled down and tried to convince the American public that Kilmar is dangerous and tried to bring alien smuggling charges against him and are now threatening to deport him to Uganda. And it's really heartbreaking. I feel terribly for this young man, for his family, for his wife, for due process in this country. It's been difficult to watch that someone in his situation who obtained protection from immigration court that said he would not be deported to El Salvador then had that very thing happen to him. And it's almost as if he's continually punished because of the government's mistake. It's really, really unjust when you dive into the facts.
So let's talk about why exactly Uganda, because back in 2019, an immigration judge said that he could not be deported back to El Salvador because he faced gang violence there. So he was given the status of withholding of removal. So in this context, what exactly does that mean? Just that he can't go to El Salvador and he can go anywhere else in the world?
Technically, yes. Withholding of removal is a lot like asylum. Someone has to prove that they will suffer persecution in their country if they are removed. It's a tough thing to win. I've had a lot of these cases before the immigration court, and you have to bring a lot of evidence and get through cross-examination. It's actually harder to win than asylum, believe it or not. But withholding of removal is less protective, and it only says that the person can't be removed to the country that they've sought protection from. So in his case, it's El Salvador. And normally and historically, that would be the end of the conversation because we've never really seen people deported to third countries. But this is a brainchild of the Trump administration where if they can't deport people to their countries of origin, they're looking for alternatives to get people out of the United States. And so they brokered these deals with other nations to accept our deportees. And so that's why Kilmar could be deported to Uganda, because under withholding of removal, he's only protected against deportation to El Salvador. And the country of Uganda presumably has brokered a deal with the United States to receive some of our deportees. So it's really important that the judge has blocked that deportation because I think he would be on a plane very quickly to Uganda or some other country if it weren't for that order.
What do you think this means really for immigration in this country? That someone can be deported to not their country of origin, they can be deported to some random country that they have no ties with?
I think everybody's watching. I think that the Trump administration's popularity is at an all-time low precisely because of moves like this, separating families, sending people to third countries, making up charges against them. These are all things that everybody is watching. They're on every news outlet, and it's not going in Trump's favor. And that's why we see them do things like attempt to redistrict before the midterms. I think that the court of public opinion is going to help this play out. And unfortunately for Kilmar, he is the poster child for the movement, and he suffers through it. But I don't think Americans are going to stand for this. This is just not who we are as a nation. And we're not going to stand by and watch someone like him get deported to Uganda. It's absolutely absurd. It's unacceptable.
Do you think that because he is what you're describing as the poster child, that the Trump administration is going to throw the book at him? Because I want to read something that Attorney General Pam Bondi said. She said this, quote, "He will no longer terrorize our country. He is currently charged with human smuggling, including children. The guy needs to be in prison. He doesn't need to be on the streets like all these liberals want him to be." Does that indicate to you then that this is more than just a fight about immigration? This is also a political fight then too. I mean, what do you make of that? Do you think that he's going to be made an example of by this administration?
Definitely, they are absolutely making an example of him. And it's a classic bully abuse scenario. I mean, if you think about someone who's in an abusive relationship and their partner does something wrong, but rather than admitting it and apologize, they double down and they ramp up the abuse. That's what the Trump administration is doing against Kilmar. And that's the thing that we all see clearly. And we're not falling for it. We know that those alien smuggling charges didn't contain evidence. We know that they are just doubling down to prove a point because they don't want to just admit that they were wrong. So, I mean, it's not going well for them in the court of public opinion. It just isn't.
And then Kilmar Abrego Garcia's attorney said this yesterday: "We're going to ask for an interim order that he not be deported pending his due process rights to contest deportation to any particular country." And as we know, the federal judge did block his deportation temporarily. But how strong do you think his case and his argument on due process is?
Well, I mean, I think that the unfortunate thing is that we have lower federal courts, and then we have courts of appeals, and we have the Supreme Court, and we have a pretty unpredictable judiciary. So I think this is the type of matter that could be appealed, and at some point a deportation to a third country could be allowed. And then we'll have to see what happens. I mean, if he gets deported to Uganda and disappears within their system, that's going to be a pretty big headline, and I don't think people will forget it.
I want to get back to the third country removal because that's seemingly raising some alarm bells for people. The Trump administration gave Abrego Garcia a deal to deport him to Costa Rica if he pleaded guilty to the human smuggling charges, and then he served whatever sentence that the courts gave him. He's not pleading guilty, and now the Trump administration floated that Uganda deportation. And Abrego Garcia's attorney said that the Trump administration is using the immigration system and, quote, which country someone is going to be deported to try to weaponize and gain leverage in a criminal prosecution, and then he called that flatly unconstitutional. What do you make of that?
I mean, I agree. I mean, so they're trying to bring these criminal charges against him, but taking that aside, if you think about just the idea of withholding of removal, someone being protected against removal to their country of origin, but they could go to another country. Removing someone to another country, let's say they sent him to Mexico, what that might look like in a just society is that they bring him to Mexico and he is allowed to be free there and establish a life or go to some other country and talk to his family, and he has his liberty and his freedom. It's not what we're seeing in these third country removals with the Trump administration, where people like Venezuelans are being sent into torture prisons in El Salvador, never to speak to their family. I mean, this is not what we're talking about when we say withholding of removal allows removal to other countries, not indefinite detention and disappearance into torture camps. That's not what it means.
I'm curious what you're looking out for next, specifically as an immigration attorney, because that federal judge, like we've talked about, on Monday blocked his deportation temporarily until the court hears his legal challenge fighting his deportation. So what specifically are you looking out for there?
We're watching for appeals to make sure that that stop on his removal to Uganda sticks, and waiting to see how the criminal charges go forward. I mean, at some point, if he's not removed, he should be released from custody, but all of this is in the hands of the court system. And like I said, I mean, the court systems right now are not a guarantee. It's pretty hit or miss these days in the judiciary and in Congress.
And he was released on Friday. He was detained again on Monday. Do you think there is a world in America right now where he's not deported, or do you think that's really not an option and he's just going to be deported anywhere that's not El Salvador?
I think I could foresee a world in which he would agree to leave and go to another country if he were not detained. If I were him or his lawyers, that's what I would be arguing for. Let me leave this country, but not in a jail cell. So maybe they'll work something else like that out. I don't know. I don't represent him. I wish the best for him and his legal team. I can only imagine how much stress and pressure they are under trying to navigate all of this. I mean, it's this entire spotlight of the cruelty of the Trump administration just shined on this one case is really it's a lot to take in. And I really feel for this man. I feel for him and his wife and his family. It's so unfair.
And overall, once again, from the perspective of an immigration attorney, what do you think this whole conversation, this whole legal fight means for due process?
Well, what I would say is this case doesn't speak for due process in general. I mean, due process or the lack of it is at play everywhere you look in immigration policy and enforcement, and the way that cases are being handled, and the way that courthouse attentions are happening, and the way that families are being separated, and the way that people like Kilmar are being handled. So due process is a bigger conversation. The actual case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia is about, at this point, it's about a third country removal for someone who has withholding of removal. That's ultimately what this case is about. But we're watching the behavior and the willingness on the part of the Attorney General and the Trump administration to just violate traditional norms, human rights, due process, constitutional protections, and just basic concepts of humanity. That's what we're witnessing in this case.
And do you think the Trump administration is using this case as a deterrent, saying anyone trying to come to America, don't come here because you could get sent somewhere else completely?
Do you think that there's an element of deterrence, attempted deterrence at play, but that's not really on their mind right now, deterring? They might be actually hoping that more people self-deport. And I can tell you that that is happening. People I talk to every day, good, hardworking immigrants who don't have criminal history, who we need here in this economy, are choosing to leave because they don't want to live like this. They don't want to live under siege. And I can tell you, I've talked to so many people who come from authoritarian regimes in their home countries, and they've watched this pattern play out before, and they see it happening here in the United States. And these people say to me, I'm not going to stay here and watch it in the United States either. And I'm not going to be under siege like this, and I'm leaving. And we're starting to see the results of that in our economy. And hopefully it'll become so clear to everybody by the time the midterms happen that a lot of this behavior by the Trump administration will get stopped in its tracks.
And I think with politics, a lot of the time, immigration is painted in a black and white issue, and that's really not the case. There's so much gray area when it comes to immigration. This was a top issue facing voters in 2024. As someone who is an immigration attorney, who represents these cases, who has these conversations, what do you think is missing really from the national dialogue when it comes to immigration?
I think that the missing piece began actually during the Biden administration. During the Biden administration, the conservative side was so loud. It was such a loud and regular drumbeat, claiming that immigrants were invading, that they were trafficking children, they were trafficking drugs, they were raping girls. Just that rhetoric was so routine and regular. And the Biden administration and Democrats, frankly, didn't really talk as loudly about the reality of what was going on the border. We didn't have open border. Immigrants are great for this country. All of those talking points went by the wayside. And so here we are living in this world where a bunch of people have begun to believe the lies and the anti-immigrant rhetoric that Trump displays. And now we're in a situation of imbalance. But what can help is cases like Kilmar's, other cases that reach the media, viral videos that go out, and people start to see, wait a minute, good people are being impacted by this. People I love, families are being separated. Construction is down in my area. It's hard to find landscapers. My schools are closing down. I'm starting to see that maybe this is all wrong. And I think that we're starting to see that shift a little bit in the polls, and where we're seeing the Trump administration and his approval rating, because they've gone so hard and so aggressive against immigrants that, it's obvious, unless, you're just not paying attention whatsoever, you can see that this is not actually helping our country, even if you're unmoved by the humanitarian angle.
Kate, I appreciate your update on this case. And as we see more developments come out, I hope you can come back on and break them down with me. Kate Lincoln-Goldfinch, thank you so much for joining me. You're welcome back anytime.
Thanks, Brittany.